The heavy glass door clicked shut, severing 15 years of history with a single latch. Victoria Hayes stood on the sidewalk, the city traffic blurred into a wall of static. The noise hit her like a physical weight, pressing against her chest. She gripped her handbag, the leather cool and unyielding against her sweating palms. Every car that sped past felt like a reminder of the life that had just vanished. She drove home in silence, the steering wheel slick under her touch. Once inside, the apartment felt too large, the air stagnant. She began the work of subtraction. She pulled items from the shelves, books, trinkets, remnants of a shared past, and dropped them into cardboard boxes. Each object hit the bottom with a hollow, final thud that echoed off the bare walls. By midnight, the room felt cavernous, stripped of everything but her own breath. She sat on the floor, the space around her cold and unfamiliar. She opened a notebook, pressed the pen to the paper, and wrote 3 words: "What now?" The silence of the apartment was total, a blank slate waiting for a purpose that had not yet arrived. She did not sleep. The notebook remained open, a beacon in the empty room. She spent the next 7 days scouring the shelves for answers, eventually pulling down a weathered copy of Napoleon Hill. She read until the words blurred, searching for a way to translate her current state into something useful. She found the phrase, "Every adversity carries the seed of an equal benefit." She underlined it. Then she highlighted it. She pressed the marker so hard against the page that the paper tore, a jagged rip through the center of the text. She didn't repair it. Instead, she moved to her laptop. The screen light was the only illumination in the dark apartment. She spent hours researching, eyes burning, fingers moving across the keys until they ached. She registered a domain name for a consulting site, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on the screen. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. She began drafting content, 16 hours a day, building a structure from the wreckage. She ignored the hunger, the fatigue, and the encroaching silence of the apartment. She had a target. She had a seed. She was ready to plant it. The first month was a masterclass in invisibility. Victoria composed 50 distinct messages to potential clients, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the keys. She tracked every sent notification, waiting for a ping that never came. 48 people ignored her. No replies, no dismissals, just the suffocating absence of response. She stared at the empty inbox until the numbers blurred into gray static. She did not stop. She cleared a space in the center of the kitchen, set her phone against a stack of books, and turned on the camera. Her throat felt tight, her pulse visible in the base of her neck. She pushed start. She spoke into the lens, her voice wavering, catching on the unfamiliar cadence of her own pitch. She finished the recording, uploaded it, and waited. 2 people liked the post. 2. The silence that followed was louder than the rejection. She closed the laptop lid, walked to the sink, and splashed cold water on her face. She returned to the desk, opened a new document, and began typing again. The silence was not a wall, it was a test. She kept typing, the clicks of the mechanical keyboard the only sound in the apartment. The bank account balance dropped lower each week, a red number flashing warning signs she chose to ignore. She spent her last significant savings on a basic website layout, stripping her personal funds down to the wire. Every Tuesday night, she hosted a free webinar from her kitchen table. The surface was buried under stacks of notes, empty mugs, and tangled cables. She sat in the same chair for 6 hours straight, back rigid, eyes burning from the screen's glare. The first session drew 3 attendees, the second, 5. She spoke until her throat felt like it was filled with glass, forcing words out through the fatigue. On the 4th Tuesday, her hand shook so violently she knocked over her water bottle. Liquid soaked into the paperwork, blurring the ink of her carefully prepared scripts. She froze, her breath hitched in her chest, a sharp panic seizing her lungs. The camera light blinked red, recording her hesitation. She wanted to stand up and walk away, to let the silence win. Instead, she grabbed a towel, wiped the desk with frantic, sweeping motions, and leaned back into the frame. "Let's continue," she said, her voice rough but steady. She finished the hour, guiding strangers through systems she had built on zero sleep. When the stream ended, she slumped forward, forehead resting on the cool, damp wood. Her savings were gone. Her body was breaking. She had nothing left to give. The laptop screen hummed in the dark, a rectangle of white light against the shadows of the kitchen. Victoria sat motionless, her head cleared of thought, staring at the cursor. A chime cut through the air. A new message. She leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she clicked the notification. A woman, a stranger, had written to her. "Your words helped me navigate my own divorce." The sentence was simple, yet it hit with the force of a physical impact. Victoria read it once, then twice, then a third time, tracing the words on the screen. The exhaustion in her limbs receded, replaced by a sharp, electric clarity. She stood up, walked to the printer, and hit the command. The machine whirred, spitting out the single page. She pulled the paper, walked back to the desk, and tore a strip of tape. She pressed the message firmly against the plastic frame of her monitor, right where it would sit in her peripheral vision every time she typed. This was no longer just about survival. It was a bridge. She sat down, her back straight, and opened a new file. The fatigue remained, but the weight of it had changed. It was no longer a burden. It was fuel. She began to write, her fingers flying across the keys with a new, relentless rhythm. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of files, hard drives, and sticky notes. Victoria could no longer find the surface of the wood. Every hour brought more requests, more questions, more demand than one set of hands could process. She reached a breaking point when she missed 3 client calls in a single morning. She called an assistant, interviewed them in the corner of her living room, and handed over the stack of folders that had become her life. The transition was immediate. She packed her laptop, her printer, and the taped-up email into a single cardboard box. She walked into the new office space, a rented room with white walls, a single desk, and a window that overlooked the city. She placed her computer on the desk, watched the light hit the screen, and listened to the silence of a professional environment. The chaos of her home life was gone, replaced by the humming of a central ventilation system and the smell of industrial carpet. She looked at the empty seat next to her, then at the door. For the first time, she was not just working from a place of necessity, she was operating from a place of growth. She sat down, adjusted her chair, and turned on the lights. The stage lights were blinding, a wall of white heat that erased the individual faces in the front row. Victoria stepped into the center of the spotlight, the floorboards vibrating slightly under her weight. She gripped the microphone, her knuckles white, and felt the sudden, absolute silence of 500 people waiting for her next move. She looked out into the dark beyond the stage. Once, she would have stood here and poured out the details of her heartbreak, the late nights, and the crushing loneliness. But that version of her was gone. She cleared her throat, the sound amplified and sharp, echoing through the hall. She began to speak, not about the pain, but about the architecture of her recovery. She outlined the systems, the schedules, and the rigorous discipline that had built her current reality. Every word was precise, calculated, and steady. The crowd leaned in, their breathing audible in the quiet intervals between her points. She watched them take notes, their pens moving in unison, and felt the shift. This was no longer a story of survival. It was a manual for command. She held the microphone closer, her voice filling the room with the iron certainty of a woman who had mastered her own wreckage. The boardroom door swung open, with a muffled, heavy thud. Victoria walked across the thick carpet, the scent of mahogany and lemon polish filling the air. She reached the head of the long table, the surface smooth and cold under her fingertips. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the city hum far below the sealed glass. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. She reached out and pulled the leather-bound folder toward her. She opened it. The quarterly earnings report sat on the page, the ink crisp and dark against the white paper. Her eyes locked onto the bottom line. The number hit her a 7-figure sum that represented 5 years of unrelenting labor. She traced the digits with her index finger, feeling the texture of the print. The reality of it crashed into her, heavy and absolute. She had built this from nothing. She had moved from a kitchen table to this command center, and the evidence was right here. She did not cheer. She did not call anyone. She simply breathed, the air in the room feeling thin and sharp, and accepted the weight of her own autonomy. The transition was complete. She turned away from the table and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling glass. The city lights below pulsed like a vast, interconnected nerve system. She pressed her forehead against the cool surface, watching the traffic flow in steady, predictable lines. In the reflection of the glass, the boardroom faded, replaced by the memory of a dark room and the smell of cardboard dust. She saw herself again, sitting on the hardwood floor, surrounded by empty boxes that held the remains of a broken life. She remembered the sharp, jagged edges of that silence. It had felt like an ending then. She watched her own ghost in the glass, that younger woman clutching a notebook and asking the air for direction. She reached out, her fingers tracing the path of a distant car light on the window pane. The pain she had carried back then was not a burden to be discarded. It was the friction that had ground her down until she was sharp enough to cut through anything. It was the fire. She did not feel sorry for that woman in the boxes. She felt gratitude. The wreckage had been the blueprint, and the heartbreak had been the catalyst. She finally understood the full geometry of her own ascent. Victoria turned back to the room. Her team sat waiting, pens poised, eyes fixed on her. She walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and drew a single, bold circle around the world map pinned to the corkboard. She tapped the center of the map. "Next quarter, we launch globally," she said. The room went still, then erupted in the sound of shifting chairs and rapid note-taking. She did not linger to watch the reaction. She walked to her desk, swiped her laptop closed, and picked up her bag. The weight of the bag felt light now, balanced by the work she had already done. She moved toward the door, her pace steady and deliberate. She passed the assistant who had been with her since the kitchen table days, and gave a single, sharp nod. She opened the office door. The sound of the bustling hallway rushed in to meet her. She stepped through the frame and into the corridor. She did not look back at the room, the boardroom, or the past. She checked her phone one last time, turned the screen black, and kept walking. The next chapter was already in motion.